1,000 Allied troops are ready to cross the English Channel in a fleet of more than 5,000 amphibious ships. Another 1,200 ships are making final preparations to defend them from the sea. But that is not all. Some 4,000 bombers and 3,700 fighters are waiting for the signal to attack the enemy's coastal defenses from the air. The bloody D-Day is about to begin. The Normandy landings were designed to be the greatest event of the Second World War. Only minutes remain until 0 hour on June 6, 1944, a day that promises to go down in history, whatever the outcome. If the plan goes as planned, Nazi Germany will be on its way to its most absolute defeat. In a failure scenario, Adolf Hitler will be the leader of the New World. In this new video, we invite you to learn all the details of the brutal battle that is about to break out, going through the most important moments hour by hour. Join us on the northern coast of France as the action begins as soon as the clock strikes midnight.
When flashbacks come back, I see arms, legs, bodies.
We lost a lot of people out there. A lot of good people.
With the first part of the mission underway, D-Day is fraught with tension. Thousands of ships are already sailing towards their destination under cover of darkness, with the weight of the mission weighing on them. They know that the great landing in the French region of Normandy can change the course of history. The objective is to surprise the Germans and open a Western front so that the Nazis are forced to divide their forces. Thus, while they fight fiercely against the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, the Americans, British, and Canadians will try to strike a devastating blow and liberate Paris. During the first minutes of June 6th, an American reconnaissance team is ready to jump over the Cotentin Peninsula, a natural region of Normandy, where they will mark the drop zones for the C-47 pilots, who will arrive moments later. They trust that the dark night will serve as a shield, but the Germans are prepared to avoid any surprises. Anti-aircraft fire is the first to demonstrate this. Incessant bursts of shells light up the sky. Meanwhile, Allied soldiers stepping onto solid ground are greeted by the roar of enemy machine guns and rifles. The battle has begun much sooner than expected. The clashes are isolated, but fierce. Blood is already splattering the French coasts. This is just the beginning.
When I landed, we had the password thunder, welcome, and flash. And when I landed, another guy landed very close to me, and I turned and I was still in my parachute, and I opened my mouth to say the password, and he yelled out, "Tipper!" We had known each other so well in all this training that we could recognize just by the way we moved, you know.
At 1 in the morning, the Nazi Navy's radars begin to sound uncontrollably. They announce the presence of a large fleet on the opposite side of the Pas de Calais, a strait located at the narrowest part of the English Channel that separates Great Britain and France. The enemy is already on alert, but the mission must continue. 55 minutes later, the next phase of the plan is on British soil, from where the 1,198 bombers of the United States 8th Air Force begin to take off. All the Allied forces are concentrated there, and each of the protagonists of the mission awaits their turn. The tension is palpable in the air as the American ships of the so-called U Assault Force arrive at their destination off Utah Beach. They are the first fleet to arrive at their position, led by the unit's flagship, the USS Bayfield. They drop anchor 15 miles off the coast and await the signal. It is not yet time for landing. Almost simultaneously, the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions of the United States and the 6th British Parachute Company are in charge of preparing the ground to advance as planned. The latter has just landed at Ranville, where it encounters German infantrymen and panzer armored vehicles. There, the fierce fighting of the brutal day begins. The Allies' objective is to eliminate as many of the enemy in the area as possible before landing. For this reason, the Royal Air Force begins its bombing raids on several targets in Caen. While their planes are flying through the skies, the Nazi defenses try to shoot them down.
We couldn't have been more than 300 or 400 feet off the ground.
As soon as we hit the coast, then it was, they called it the Night of Nights, and the sky lit up, and the flak came up, and the machine gun tracers were coming up. You could hear the bullets hitting the side of the plane, and
there's no substitute for having somebody trying to kill you.
Because the pilots were trying to stay away from the flak and everything.
The German counterattack is not precise, but it is massive. Some Allied aircraft are hit by enemy fire, but the operation must continue. Near the end of the 4th hour of the day, 52 Waco gliders with paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division land to carry out Operation Detroit in the north of Hinesville. The objective is to take control of 4 roads leading to Utah Beach, and thus prevent the arrival of reinforcements for their adversaries.
All I can see is tracers flying in all directions down there. It looked like every one of them was going to hit you between the eyes, and then they peel off one way or the other, and that's about all.
Another front of the huge operation opens. The Saint-Marcouf Islands are more than 6 kilometers north of the designated landing site, but they are not, however, alien to Allied plans. The American command is convinced that the Germans have placed an advanced observation post there. A total of 132 soldiers reach the beaches and discover that they are actually deserted, but full of mines. Nevertheless, they manage to take control without any problems. Meanwhile, in the distance, they begin to hear powerful rumblings.
And that ocean lit up like a Christmas tree. And it was 4:30 in the morning, and they were bombing that beach like hell.
The 6th hour of D-Day begins, the key moment of the operation. Allied forces open intense fire from the sea on the Nazi coastal defenses in order to begin landing maneuvers. The first naval bombardments are led by the cruisers Orion, Ajax, Argonaut, and Emerald, together with 13 destroyers. Their objective is Gold Beach. At the same time, 18 Marauder bombers of the Royal Air Force attack the German positions at Kinesi Mount. And coordinated with the other actions, the Free French ships Montcalm and Georges Laigle open fire on the Nazi battery at Longueuil-sur-Mer, together with the USS Arkansas. A few minutes later, ships of the Eastern Naval Task Force, under the command of British Second Admiral Philip Vian, also join the attacks from the sea. In this case, the Allied offensive is targeting Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches.
And I said, this is going to be a piece of cake. There can't be nobody left on that beach with the bombardment they took. And I could see them soldiers, they were scared stiff, you know, and they can see they were nervous.
At 5:34 in the morning comes the moment of greatest tension within the maneuver. Everything is happening simultaneously, and any failure in the meticulous plan can change the course of history. Another key will be the behavior in the face of the German response, which up to this point has not given any signs of its defensive strategy. The headquarters of the 352nd Infantry Division receives reports that there are no enemy ships off the coast of Carentan. It is possible to continue with the advance without resistance. However, the Americans are faced with a major problem. The troops had launched 32 amphibious tanks into the water, about 6 kilometers off the coast of Omaha. These were Sherman DDs, which had a canvas cover to help them float and a propeller at the rear to propel them. But the strong waves on the beach turned into a death trap for these tanks. In the end, 27 of them sank. A few minutes later, luck seems to change. The opponent wants to take advantage of it. The guns of the German defensive battery at Longue-sur-Mer open fire on the destroyer USS Emmons and the cruiser USS Arkansas. They do not cause significant damage, but it becomes a turning point in the battle. The advantage of the Allies' surprise assault begins to fade away, and the Nazis become increasingly stronger from their positions.
Well, we were told that the Germans held the high ground above the beach. We knew there were fortifications on the beach. We'd been told that.
Their guns weren't positioned in such a way that unless you got real close, you couldn't even see them. They had some large guns hidden like inside the rocks and so forth.
Nothing can destroy the Allied momentum, however. The battle has begun and there is no turning back. The only way out is to continue fighting as planned and seek victory or die trying. The feeling is clear. The naval artillery piles up new bombardments to try to destabilize the Germans at Houlgate, Mount Kinesi, and Villerville. A new hour of the battle begins with some of the most ferocious attacks of the war. An air fleet of 270 American bombers drops more than 4,400 110-kilogram bombs on targets along the Normandy coast. The detonations turn into enormous columns of fire that destroy the terrain and eliminate any Germans in the area of the explosion. Time continues to pass, and the landing is imminent. But before that, the American forces resume bombing from ships in the Omaha sector. However, the offensive on the beach is now specifically aimed at Pointe du Hoc. It is the top of a cliff where the Germans have placed key defenses. Almost simultaneously with this event, the Allied naval fleet makes contact with Utah Beach. The moment has arrived. The transport ships open their floodgates, and a gigantic wave of soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division of the United States jumps onto the sand with their rifles, ready for an epic battle. Just a few minutes later, the second assault begins, this time in Omaha, with soldiers from the 116th Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division. After long hours of preparation, the most anticipated moment becomes reality. But it is only the beginning of a long and bloody war. Beyond the intense bombing to clear the area, the American fighters encountered a Nazi resistance much fiercer than they imagined. The machine gun fire was incessant, and a huge number of casualties were suffered in just a few minutes.
We landed in water that was only a little over our knees, fortunately. We didn't have the deep water that some others had. As I hit the beach, Wally Lawton lowered the ramp, and the soldiers started pouring out, and I seen them dropping.
At Gold, boats armed with 127mm rockets opened fire on the beach defenses. At this location, Sword, both assigned to the British, and at Juneau with Canadian participation, the landing has been delayed. Nevertheless, the troops are ready and know that it is time to act. The soldiers jump into the water near the shore and run into battle, firing non-stop. An hour and a half has passed since the beginning of this stage, and at Utah Beach, 4 American battalions have already landed. The fighting is brutal. There is no mercy between the sides, and the only objective is to water the beaches with enemy blood.
And the water was really red too, with all the people that get hit. It's awful.
They had us pinned down. Actually, you couldn't move. If you stood up, you were gone.
It was pretty hard to form any kind of a cohesive attack plan at that point.
Only a few minutes passed before the German 726th Grenadier Regiment reported that one of its fortifications in the Omaha dunes had become the new Allied target. It had come under fierce attack by 40 soldiers and amphibious tanks that had arrived in the area. Concern was growing in the Nazi ranks. At the beginning of a new hour, the 210mm gun of the German battery at Asville was destroyed by Allied ships. The situation was becoming increasingly alarming, and the Nazis still had no news from their leader. Adolf Hitler was just waking up in his Berlin home. The previous night, he had stayed up late listening to Wagner symphonies and still had no idea of the storm that was brewing. At 9:20, Omaha is the scene of the most brutal clashes of D-Day. Faced with this situation, American General Clarence Hubner orders the ships off the beach to begin firing on the German defenses. He knows that the fire will not be able to distinguish between the enemy and his own soldiers, but it is a risk he decides to take. The attack lasts 28 minutes and wipes out a good part of the resistance.
You mentioned the naval bombardment, and it was tremendous, and so much so that we wondered whether any Germans would be left up on the bluffs.
I couldn't believe it.
And
I mean, with the bombardment they took.
It was one of the big surprises that we had, was to find the level of the opposition of the defense there after the tremendous bombing. They withstood it pretty well.
Some 200 soldiers from the 116th Infantry Division managed to overcome the ironclad defenses at Omaha and reach the top of the cliff that provided an advantageous position for the enemy. They advance along this path until they reach Vierville-sur-Mer. Continuing with this offensive, the U.S. Navy destroyer McCook managed to eliminate the 2 75mm cannons that the Nazis were firing from Pointe de la Percée, causing great damage on the beach.
The destroyers stayed there until there were no more firing from any source of the Germans. The German wall was broken forever. What was happening when we got there? People are getting off the boats and being killed on the beach.
At 11:27, the German 916th Grenadier Regiment reported that the attackers were in control of the high points on the beach at Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer. The commander of the 352nd Infantry Division gave the following order: counterattack the enemy to drive him back into the sea. Despite the wishes of the Nazi High Command, the Allied presence on the coasts of Omaha is growing. Before noon, a new battalion of the American 18th Infantry Regiment lands to join the offensive. The advance of the American troops becomes uncontrollable for the Germans. On Utah Beach, the 8th Marine Regiment penetrates the defenses that have fought to exhaustion. Nazi corpses in his wake, he manages to enter Poupeville, a small town where one of the few roads connecting the coasts with the interior of France is located. Control will be key to the next stage of the plan, liberating Paris. In Omaha, the Americans achieve a new success. The Allied forces have just reached the church in KlLLED-sur-Mer, converted into a German bastion from where the Nazi artillerymen had a clear view of the scene. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the American colonel, James E. Rutter, receives a response to a request for reinforcements for the Battle of Pointe du Hoc, the cliff area west of Omaha. He is informed that all the Rangers have been landed on beaches about 6 kilometers away, so he must hold out with the men he has in the field. After an hour, the American soldiers' conviction pays off. Even without the support of a new battalion, they managed to get the German defenders to abandon the Pointe du Hoc bunkers on the western flank. Almost 8 hours after the landing, Omaha Beach remains engulfed in the fierce flames of the bloody confrontation. Now the protagonist is the destroyer USS Harding, which opens fire on the roof of the Vierville-sur-Mer church, where the Nazis also have artillery observers. The battle is not yet won. The German 916th Grenadier Regiment counterattacks American units advancing between Nazi checkpoints in the same area of Omaha. 2 other American destroyers approach the coast to provide close support to the landed troops. The blood continues to flow and leave its mark in the sand.
We did trips back and forth, bringing everything from troops to plasma, blood plasma, K rations, shells for the guns for the thing.
Late in the afternoon, another fierce counterattack begins at La Fière, where the Allies seek to control a new region that will form a bridge into the interior of the country. Meanwhile, in Omaha, the first Sherman tank reaches the road that connects the beach to Colleyville through a small valley. However, it is immediately destroyed by a German anti-tank battery. A resistance post located on the western edge of Omaha is attacked, and the Germans are eliminated. The bunker is now under the control of men of the 5th Ranger Regiment and the American 116th Infantry Regiment. At 1800 hours, at Juno Beach, the last German defenders of the coastal installations in the Nan Red sector surrender. At the same time, men from the 2nd Battalion of the British East Yorkshire Regiment assault a Nazi fortified point at Ouistreham. These positions are about to come under Allied control. 10 minutes later, in Omaha, the German 915th Grenadier Regiment reports that it has overtaken the Americans from behind at the castle of Colleyville-sur-Mer and that its wounded can no longer be evacuated. The most brutal fighting continues on the bloodiest beach of the conflict.
There's no substitute for hearing a bullet snap past your head and you realize that someone's trying to kill you. And you can't explain or put into words how that feels. But it forever changes you. You're never quite the same.
More than an hour later, the Nazis also attempt to strike at Pointe du Hoc. They launch a counteroffensive supported by elements of Leguay, attacking the American Rangers' position from the east. A fierce battle breaks out with heavy casualties on both sides. Night has returned, but the battle is not over. 6 German tanks make their way into Lyons-sur-Mer, where they observe the landing operations before returning to their positions and trying to defend the village from the enemy advance. Their comrades are still holding out, but they are aware that Allied forces will soon fall upon them. After extensive hand-to-hand fighting, American soldiers recover from the German counterattack at Colleyville-sur-Mer and take control of the main Nazi bunker there. They manage to take a new step towards their goal.
Enormous Allied reinforcements have been pouring across the channel and onto the beaches and into the gaps in the Nazi line of steel and cement fortifications along the coast. Supreme Headquarters says, initial landing succeed, fighting proceed. Winston Churchill says that the enemy was surprised by our landings. The airborne troops are well established behind Nazi lines. The Allied forces have penetrated several miles inland. Losses have been far lighter than had been anticipated, and the operation is proceeding in a thoroughly satisfactory manner.
The fatigue of a long day seems to hasten the end. A German panzer company attacks the south in Juneau without success. That beach is already in Allied hands. Meanwhile, 256 gliders land in the Ranville area to take control of a new bridge to the interior of France. D-Day is about to end. A new air attack breaks into the city of Caen, while, after hard fighting, the town of Tilleville is liberated. During the last hour of the day, the Germans try to develop a counterattack at Pointe du Hoc. It will last until after midnight, but will not achieve its goal. The Allies have managed to twist history in Normandy.
Although all the beaches on which we have landed have been cleared of the enemy, and some of the beaches have been linked together, the fighting inland is both heavy and general.
The first phase of the invasion is going well. The Allies now control about 50 miles of the French coast.
After the landing and the fierce battles, the troops continued on their way. Eventually, Paris was liberated, and Nazi defeat was imminent. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler felt cornered and decided to take his own life. Days later, Germany surrendered and the end of World War II in Europe came. Now, after having learned hour by hour about the most incredible events of this day, the time has come to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in our next video to continue discovering the most captivating chapters of military history.